Has anybody come across something called quantum linguistics? So quantum linguistics is the idea is being able to take people outside the boundary of their conditioning, the boundaries of their thought. So, for example, John might think that the only way that he can be happy in his job is by leaving work. So he'll say, I want to leave my job so I can find a job that I'm happy in. So therefore it would be, you would ask these questions, and one of these questions would be, well, what happened if you didn't leave your job and didn't find something you were happy in? So you use a double negative, which takes them to a completely different way of thinking, which comes up with new answers and new questions and new ideas that we can't get to without the language taking us there. Remember I said that the fifth was the most fundamentally amazing and life-changing? This is why it's the most important. There's no going back for this, people. So I'm warning you in advance. Neil Bohr, famous physicist, quantum physicist, said, anybody who thinks they can talk about quantum physics, quantum mechanics, without getting dizzy, hasn't yet understood the first word of it. So therefore, I apologize if there's some dizziness in the room in the next few slides, but the guy who founded the principle said that you can't talk about it without being the case. So if you do feel dizzy at any time, that's exactly just where you're supposed to be. So I said that we were going to look at this model for understanding how to be able to reprogram people. Because if a computer stops functioning, you don't throw it away generally. You get IT out. Well, they first tell you to turn it off and reboot it, which is meditation. Then they'll come and they'll reformat the computer, which is just upgrading the software, and which is the same as attitudes and beliefs. But that's the mechanical model. And I've just said we've moved away from that. So we've moved away towards this quantum wave-particle duality. That's where everything behaves in two states. It behaves as particles. Now, this is actually slightly incorrect, apologies, because this is showing these particles have movement. Well, in the quantum world, you can't measure where something is and measure its movement. You can't do both. You can only measure where it is or how fast it's going. So you can only measure it as a particle being there or as a wave of movement. So in essence, what that's saying is, while we're not looking at something, it exhibits a full potential of being everything, every possibility. It's only when we actually go to observe it does it behave in the way that we expect it to behave. So therefore, the expectation that we put onto people, things, can affect them in ways that we can't imagine. I've got some slides that show you how that technology works, and that's what we're getting to. We're getting to the whole idea that actually organisations have a frequency vibration, and that we can change that vibration. The vibe we're talking about, dancers getting the vibe, we can change that vibration through the way we think and the way we have coherence with our heart. So there's a famous example called Schrodinger's cat. We've probably all heard of this, which is the cat is both dead and alive in a box, because there's a half-life isotope that releases radiation that will kill the cat, but we don't know when it's going to do it. So while the box is closed, the cat is both alive and dead, until we open the box and go, oh, the cat is actually dead or alive. Now, how might that work in the real world? Well, in the real world, your car doesn't start. So is your car broken and not going to start again unless you get a mechanic out? Or is your car just misbehaving and in a minute it'll behave and not happen again? Both those realities are true from a quantum perspective. It's just what you observe in the moment will, and also what you believe previously, will affect that outcome and change the reality of whether it just starts or doesn't start, and you have to get a mechanic. There's something called spooky action, which is you take electrons that are joined together as an entangled pair, you split them up, send one to New York and one to LA. You do something to the one in New York, and instantaneously, not at the speed of light, instantaneously, faster than the speed of light, which is one of the things that has broken an irrefutable law that we all think is true, which is nothing travels faster than the speed of light. It's not true. There's information that travels instantaneously. So what happens is you make an effect on this photon, and automatically this photon changes its in correlation to this one. So, for example, we might change the spin on this atom, on this electron, and automatically that electron spins. Even if these are totally at different places in the universe, the same thing happens, because they are connected on a different dimension or a different level, which has instantaneous information transfer. It's called the entanglement theory. So, I'm going to ask you to imagine now not humans as being computers, hardware and software, but as being quantum computers. That is, we have the IQ, which we're all aware of, we get trained out in school. EQ, the thing that a lot of people are starting to train in. PQ, that's that, go to the gym, well-being, drink water, exercise, stretch, breath work, kind of aware of it. However, what we don't realize is there's an energetic field around us that all of these correlate with and are affected by. And that's what I'm going to talk to you about. Looks a bit like this, where this spiritual SQ, I don't mean spiritual as in a particular religion, I mean spiritual as in its energy. So think of us as in a battery. We have the hardware and the mind and the heart and how that operates, and that creates this field around us. And this field around us, in some religions, some old indigenous populations, we call the Merkaba, and they talk about it going 50 foot in diameter. So that means right now, if we could have the right measuring equipment in the room, which I'll show you later, we would all be in each other's electromagnetic fields right now, which means that there's some information passing, not just verbally, not just through my body movements, but on that spooky level that I talked about earlier, where there's just information passing in a different dimension, electromagnetic dimension. You may not have heard of Nikola Tesla. If you haven't, please read his work. He's absolutely amazing. Most of what we have today, electrically wise, is from him. He said that if you want to know the secrets of the universe, think in terms of energy, frequency, and vibration. So I'm just going to explain what those are, and then I'll explain how they apply. We've got the frequency of wave, so like a really low sound wave versus a really high X-ray. There are different speeds of oscillation, frequency, the amount of times it oscillates in any given moment, and the wavelength. And therefore, whether it's low energy or high energy. It doesn't necessarily mean that a low energy wave isn't impactful, because earthquake waves are low energy, low frequency, but they still have a massive impact. Whereas gamma waves, which are very high level, often we don't say they even have any effect on us. This just shows brain waves. So we've got the 5 different states of brain waves. Delta wave is when you're deeply asleep and not dreaming. Theta waves is when you're drifting dreamily in and out of sleep and dreaming. This is the point of REM sleep. Then you have alpha waves, which is when potentially you're meditating, you're breathing, you're totally relaxed. Beta waves are when you're engaged in activities and conversation. And hopefully we're all in gamma waves right now, which is hyper brain activity, which is accessing superintelligence. We have this electromagnetic field around our body. Has anybody come across this idea before? Okay, awesome. So there's 2 electromagnetic fields that are going on here. There's one that's created by the body and one that's created by the heart. This can actually be photographed. The Kirlian photography, it's also called GDV gas scanning, can photograph the bioluminescence of the human body and look and tell you where you're diseased versus where you're healthy, and tell you what's going on and what will come from the ethereal into the physical realm. So what is likely to become a physical illness with you in the future. This is actually a field that's happening currently within biology. There's a quantum field of study called quantum bioluminescence, where they're actually studying the photon effect, the light effect of what the body emits. So they're measuring it and being able to go, okay, so different people are different powered. So we're establishing that each of us has a electromagnetic field around us that can be measured and has a sort of a health. So let's look at the mind-body connection. How does this all work together? Well, the heart has an electrical pulse that's 100,000 times stronger than the brain, and a magnetic pulse that's 5,000 times stronger than the brain. The heart's magnetic field can be measured several feet away from the body. Negative emotions versus positive emotions can create different types of heart waves, pulses. In fetal development, the heart forms before the brain. When a mother is separate from a child, the baby's heartbeat synergizes. So this is the example of what dissonance versus coherence looks like. So the heart rate, an average heart rate, is still the same, but what happens is that it's not beating in a methodical pattern. It's a bit more random and abstract. It's what's called dissonance, where it's not in alignment. And so the negative emotions, which I'll come to showing you later, there's something called the emotional guidance scale, shows you the negative emotions have a different vibratory expression than positive emotions. This again just shows, so frustration, anxiety, worry, irritation, you can see it's going up and down. They actually now call this HRV, heart rate variability. And smartwatches now can actually measure your stress layers, and that's using this technology. So what happens is that if you think back to the fact that I said we have an aura that can measure around us, an electromagnetic field can measure around us, if you are at a place where you are stressed, you are communicating that stress non-verbally, electromagnetically to others around you. And through something called coherence, i.e. the fact that we all want to like and love each other, we all average out at the same level. So if you've got everybody, if you walk in a building, it's stressed, you can feel the tension in the air. Have you ever heard that before? You walk in a room and go, oh, look at this air with a knife, you know? We've said that before. Or you walk in a room, especially in an old England, where you walk in a room and it's a bit cold in here. Or you walk in not necessarily maybe a church, but maybe a Buddhist meditation center or a yoga retreat, and you walk in and you feel welcomed, you feel loved. Now imagine that if this is all of your people that are on your call center, or all of the people in your retail arms, or all of the people that are serving your customers and dealing with customers, the customers are going to run away, or it's going to attract the wrong kind of customers. Versus if you've got, this is where people are vibrating out, what that's going to create. And also the solutions that come out of this kind of thinking versus this kind of thinking. So this is the emotional guidance scale. Talks about love, gratitude, joy, appreciation, down to positive, enthusiasm, optimism, hopefulness, contentment, and then you've got pessimism, disappointment, blame, anger, insecurity, guilt, unworthiness, fear, grief, and depression. And so what happens is that depending on where your emotions are at any one time, that's affecting where your emotional heart rhythm's at, which is affecting what's going on, what's being projected outside of you.
So that shift from frustration to appreciation can occur if you change your physical state or your breathing state? Or...
So normally, breath and physical posture are doorways. So what happens is you can spot a pattern of breathing, a pattern of breath, because if you're breathing shallow and a bit over like that, if you go... you've created a window of space where you can take a breath a moment and revisit awareness to what's going on for you. So this is time. This one across this way. This is past. This is future. What very often happens is we're sitting here in the omnipresent eternal now. There is no other moment. We can't sit in the past or sit in the future. As individuals, we're always in the now. But what happens is that through language and through our projections, our responses, we either go into the past. This is what I call a shadow, which is the negative, and this is the positive. So, if you've seen the Metrovingian Man, I haven't gone into the mathematics of this today because it blows out in time, but oops, didn't do a very good job of drawing that one. But if you look at, say, for example, the word, and I've shown you this before, Jeff, the word live. Well, if you reverse that word back, it spells evil. So it's this ability of us projecting light, because that's all we're doing really, projecting light out that's positive, or projecting that's towards life, or projecting light out that's negative towards death. And we can either do that about a past remembered event, or a future projected event. And so most people live in below the line, remembering something negative that's happened in the past and projecting it is going to happen again in the future. Whereas, ultimately, back to your question a minute ago, Sarah, the reason why we want to take a breath or do our posture is because it brings us back to this moment of eternal now. So then we can go, so for example, I'm remembering something about the past, feeling upset or despondent or whatever. I'm going to, oh, wait a minute, I'll take a breath back to now. Well, how can I choose that response that Jeffrey said a minute ago, choose and positively repower it? Again, negative future, like, the robots are going to take over. We're all going to run out of jobs. Repattern that too. We're going to change the level of consciousness across the planet so that robots support us, love us, care for us, and we have a new future we can't even imagine. So how that looks is vibration, also colour, feelings of shame, and then what you focus on, and what you say to yourself, your self-talk, and how that affects the body, which is muscle tension, not chronic pain, for example. It's trapped emotion, right the way up through to balance, which is your middle section, which is where you're, from surprise to satisfaction, from happy to strength, up to then these really high vibrations of love and gratitude. They say that if you want to create something, if you really want to manifest something, be grateful it's already happened. There's a fake it till you make it idea. And that actually has a scientific backing now. So just to show you, love, which is the top of the funnel, that actually encodes twice as many DNA coding sites as fear. Fear, as a vibration, tends to be much more sticky. Because it's low vibration, it's longer, it lasts, it stays about more. The higher vibrations, they do have a lot more energy, they travel a lot further, but it tends to be that they're quick to come and quick to go unless you practice them. To give you an example of what effect that has on the electromagnetic field, fear, very shallow. I feel like I'm up to my neck in it right now at work. Say, for example, we have expressions like that. Shallow breathing, because I'm stressed, I'm not doing work. As opposed to love, I feel expansive and I've got a deep diaphragmatic breath and I feel really powerful. And it actually has a massive impact. And you can imagine, again, there's 1,000 people in an organisation. Say NAB, 20,000 people. If those 20,000 people are all operating, this versus here, how's that going to affect the actual capacity of energy the organisation has? And then that energy to make decisions and to attract customers and to, bring about a positive future as opposed to a negative one.
So why don't you just give everybody Prozac?
It's a great question, but Prozac is a...
Or some sort of thing that makes them feel happy.
Because it's an external stimulant. Anything external that's taken that's put internally is a mask over an internal experience. You've got to allow the external to release. The internal to release externally so you're not holding on to it. Anything you take, drink, alcohol, drugs, everything external is a modulator of an expression that you haven't allowed to express.
Feeling really in love though, if someone would pump you full of acid or something.
You would, yeah. And again... Acid is a good choice. It's a great choice. The only thing with acid, for example, is acid opens you up, but because it opens you up unregulated. You haven't got your breath work, your spiritual regulation to hold the frequency, and that means that when you're open, anything positive and negative can come into your field and your aura.
Yeah. So there's like people who have bad trips.
That's probably their psychological state of mind at the time. But what I mean is that this is your aura. You can get tears like viruses in computers. If they're negative, they can come through when you have like maybe an LSD thing because you open yourself up. You just open yourself up and you can't regulate what comes in, what doesn't come in. Whereas if you do it through breath work and practice, diligent practice, the harmonic of how you open yourself up will regulate what frequency of intelligence can come into your field. So it's all about people and culture. So thinking back to this way that we have this human biological quantum computer, these magnetic fields, we've shown the correlation between the thought and the feeling and how those interact with each other, whether it's coherence or dissonance, and how that affects your field and how that field affects somebody else's field. And all of a sudden, water cooler conversations destroy your culture across your organisation in a heartbeat. Or, you know, some news comes out. It's because of this energetic frequency. This just goes to show you what happens. So remember I'm showing you the heart rate, which is in dissonance? Well, that is a very debilitating low energy state, versus when you have coherence between your heart and your brain, you have your emitter frequency. Now, the reason why this is the 2-hour introduction is because there is a whole heap of science and practices and a whole load of other stuff that we can go through. For example, just to give you an idea, up in the brain here sits the pineal gland. The pineal gland has what's called a piezoelectric effect. What that means is that when we breathe, the movement of the spinal fluid, which is a fluid, the physical movement, has a conversion in the piezoelectric from a physical to an electromagnetic. So this is the seat of where the breath moves the spinal fluid, changes the electric then changes the field around us. So there's scientific evidence that shows how we do this. And then it's just the practice of learning, well, what's my practice? What's my breath work? How do I have to use my language? How do I show up? How do I regulate my emotions? How do I communicate? As a leader, what do I need to do in my organisation? How do I get the leadership to think this way and build their strategies that way and build their organisation that way? And then how do I build that into the culture of the organisation? This is my purpose in this life, is to create something called coherence across the planet. And it is where we are literally looking to raise enough of the individuals to raise their energy levels that thus changes the background frequency and harmonic of everybody's energy levels on the planet, which is how the cultural dialogue will change around fear, hurt, shame, all of the blame in the financial system and everybody owning money and all that stuff. That is the cultural dialogue that's a background representation of how everybody's thinking and feeling all the time. There's something called Project Coherence, which is... and there's studies, I didn't put any studies in here, but there's 50 peer-reviewed studies that show, for example, Washington, D.C., there was, over a 8-week period, 900 people meditated and they had a 25% drop in serious crime. There are studies that show that certain people meditated and there was a drop in car accidents in the area they meditated. There's studies that show when you go into a neighborhood and break a window, that neighborhood will then, if you don't repair the window, that neighborhood will slide more breakages, more crime, opposed to if you repair the window and keep the windows repaired, the neighborhood will stay uplifted and therefore there won't be crime and so on and so forth. And that's called spiral dynamics. Spiral dynamics is the harmonics of consciousness. So we have different levels of thinking. At the bottom level is fight or flight, beige. Then we move to purple, which is tribal. Then we move to red, which is somebody out of the tribe went, you know what, I can dominate the tribe and just get everybody to do everything for me, so the power of me. Then what happens is that the tribe get pissed off with having a dictator, and so what they do is they put rules in place, a framework and a system in place to stop that from happening. So now the rules are what's in charge. And then somebody comes in and goes, oh, you know what, I can profit from those rules. And capitalism happens where somebody profits from the rules. And then what happens is that somebody makes enough money that they don't need to be capitalist anymore because they're now sat on $5 billion or whatever. So now they start hugging trees and looking after the environment. And that's that circle at the top of those. The next wave, the next tier that we've started seeing is the integrated self, so the individual that can go up and down those, so they can get angry, they can be tribal, they can pull any of those frequencies they want together and talk to anybody who's in any of those frequencies. And then 8, which is turquoise, which is the experience that I had when I had that death experience, which is the understanding of an omnipresent interconnectedness. So I find it difficult for anything to happen and for me not to feel that connectionness. And that is because there is a omnipresent field of energy that basically bathes the planet that we're all connected into. And that's what quantum science is now showing. And so what this means is, I'll show you. So for example, you've got somebody really good in the sales team. They happen to be number 3. It doesn't matter. They're really good at selling. They're making themselves money. All of a sudden, you promote them to a sales manager. But they're now stealing all of the good leads for themselves because they're all about themselves, which means the team diminishes. Or look at 4. So now that's Singapore. It's all about the rules. 5 would be Australia or England, capitalist society. You've got a lot of people now the movement now is away from capitalism to how do we look after the planet. So they're basically talking about trends of the vibrations and waves and how that shows up in consciousness. Now, none of this is supposed to be a full in-depth understanding education. This is just a 2-hour workshop to share this body of knowledge and say, like, if we want to then take it further on that growth model of how to grow a business consciously and how to get self-actualization, then conscious leadership, and then culture, it's these tools that are going to be used to do that with. As if we haven't gone deep already. But this is going deep into spiritual quotient or spatial quotient. So it's spiritual, but it's also spatial because we're being aware of the space around us and the energy around us. The American military use this for remote viewing, so they don't bother spending spies in planes to far-off lands and paying for them to be there. They'll just get a group of people to meditate and go remotely through their meditation and go and look and do the spying. There's all sorts of applications of this that's being used around the world. This is the electromagnetic frequency scale. You can see that 1/10,000,000th of the information available out there on the electromagnetic scale is the visible light spectrum, which tends to be what we see. There's a hell of a lot of things happening that we just can't see, but doesn't make them any less real. Said another way, just to show you that this is what most people focus on as being truth, but it just so isn't. Now, remember we talked earlier about the gamma waves as being the ultra receptive brain waves that put us in a super hyper intelligent state. So from gamma waves point of view, the reason why I suggest this is talking about that pineal gland we talked about earlier. So X-ray, etheric, astral, mental and spiritual, all of that higher vibration, X-rays right the way up to gamma waves, all comes through our third eye. That affects the piezoelectric crystals in our third eye and affects our body. And so there is things happening at a far larger consequence than what we can imagine on a galactic scale that's having an effect on our global consciousness right now, which is why we're talking in our language about waking up and why we're saying that, the age of the Aquarius, the song came out, and why all of that stuff's happening is because it's happening to something bigger than just us. We're just an expression of that right now. It's been proven that atoms, what we think are the smallest building blocks of life, actually don't exist. They're all 99.9999% empty space, which means that the computer you're looking at, the chair you're sitting on, and even yourself right now is almost mostly not there. Now, why am I saying that? I'm saying that because we very often think that what we are is a consequence, and so therefore we need to take an external pill to heal us or something like that. But the truth of the matter is, if we're not mostly there, it's just an image. If it's just an image or a memory, we can change that. This is a representation of what actually the basis of life looks like. Things popping in and out of reality, vibrating at a very small level that just happen to vibrate quick enough that makes us think that they're solid. It's an example of what the human body actually is more like than what we think. And this is the outstanding thing. Your brain rebuilds itself every year. Your DNA every 2 months. Stomach lining in 5 days. Skin every year. Blood in 4 months. You have a new skeleton every 3 months. And your liver every 6 weeks. You have a new body, 98% in 365 days, and a new body completely every 2 years, which means that you're not the same person you were 2 years ago. You may think you are, but we regrow ourselves, we change ourselves. And it's that energetic correlation between what we think and what we say and what we believe and what we're told and all the programming in here and how our heart feels, that vibrational print and how that affects the field around us that creates the blueprint that the energy vibrates to, that creates the reality that we experience as being physical.
Why do scars and tattoos disappear?
Generally, what happens is we have a cultural, a harmonic resonance culturally, which is an understanding that if you burn yourself, it leaves a scar and that scar stays. So it's not necessarily the fact that the scar stays or goes, it's the fact that the programming of the computer says if this scar appears, it stays. There's, again, didn't go into this, there's a lot of proof of individuals that have got birthmarks that are, when do past life regression, that's actually the way that they were killed. I've personally witnessed birthmarks come and go in hypnosis. I've personally seen eye colours change. There's all sorts of things that shouldn't be able to happen that actually do happen at that level. There was, I didn't put it in this, but there's one lady there was 4 personalities inhabiting the same body. She went to the bar, had a drink. It's not an English and Irish and Scotsman story, promise. 4 of them went to the bar, had a drink. 3 of them were drinking, got paralytic. She couldn't really get to the car, got to the car, struggled, couldn't get the keys in the ignition, just managed to get the keys in the ignition, started the car and drove off. The bartender's like, got to ring the police. She was paralytic. Rang the police pulled her over, breathalyzed her, couldn't find any alcohol trace. Took her down to the police station, did a blood analysis, no alcohol in the body. Now, she's got full personality, so she's not the most coherent of people to talk to. Eventually, the police psychologist got hold of her and got talking to her and realised that there was just 3 of them had been drinking. The 4th one hadn't been drinking, which is why the 4th didn't have any alcohol in the blood. Because each of those individual personalities changed the body biochemistry and the blood based on that. There's a story of a lady who was blind for 16 years. She had 10 multiple personality disorders. She was blind for 16 years. And then one day she tried to get some cure, and she did some regression and came to one of the persons that lived in her body was a 17-year-old boy, and he could see perfectly because 17 was before the accident happened. Like, it's understanding a new way of thinking about the human body and the human experience, and then starting to go, okay, so we now need to think about not doing sugar treats at work, because sugar's not really what we want to put into the body. We need to start thinking about the way that the organisation shows up. Are we going to start putting more electronics, more Wi-Fi, less meditation? Like, what are we actually going to do to start honouring what humans are, to make them healthier so they can output better things for work, so work can look after us better? So the question is, where is your business on that journey to purpose-driven? You can't be truly purpose-driven unless you've got activated individuals that all have got coherence with their heart. Because how else can they make heartfelt decision-making, heartfelt work, alignment? You really have to have coherence. And where is any organisation on this path to actually understanding that there is such a thing as magnetic coherence, and how we're influencing that and impacting that from, having our phones on and blue screens at night? Like, that impacts us, as opposed to now we've got this warm light we can put on to stop us so we can sleep better. But then sunglasses. We wear sunglasses during the day. I was talking to Dan about this earlier. Sunglasses actually affect the amount of luminescence that we get from the sun during the day, so our limbic brain doesn't know whether it's daytime or nighttime, and therefore it kind of messes with our sleep. But what will happen is, when we start having a greater awareness of how we operate in our energy systems and how to optimize those and how to meditate and chill out, and will transform the way that we operate. So I'm going to leave you with this. This is the 3 stages of culture. We start on self-actualization individuals. We go through some coaching and get aware and start understanding, how can I increase my electromagnetic field? How can I purify my field? How can I operate better? And then conscious leadership, optimized culture, and that leads into better growth hacking. Because you really can't do business transformation unless you realize fundamentally a different way of living, a different quantum reality.
Is there a size of organisation that's just really hard to do?
I would suggest that coherence can happen anywhere. And we're not talking about going from being nothing to suddenly being everything. It's just a gradual, how do we just purify and magnify along the way our energy and who we are and how we show up. So I would say that it can happen for any organisation. That organisation, they could make all the workers realise that drinking water hydrates their body, and therefore that gives them better electromagnetic fluidity in their body, which therefore means they're going to be easier and better to think and operate. They could make them have better breaks. So the idea is to then look at scheduling an organisational health diagnostic, which is looking at where's your organisation on that journey and what's the next stage for your organisation in that process. Thank you very much, everybody.